So I want to make another video for you guys today. It's been a long time, but the recent couple of weeks I've been dealing with a lot of wrist pain, just from overuse. Brings up a good topic, and on top of that, in a couple of my lessons, I've been really trying to hit home on proper hand form, and so to make sure those two things really kind of make it important to talk about this topic. And so the topic we're going to be talking about is proper hand form. For my guitar players, there's some circumstances that do happen relatively often during your playing. There's some solo work, bending bending a string while you're playing a solo, playing certain open chords that are going to really call for you to leave proper hand positioning in order to accomplish those chords or licks or whatever it is that you're doing. But for standard things, so let's say it's a bar chord, a power chord, certain solo movements, or for bass players, most everything that you do, there actually is a proper hand positioning that you're trying to get. And really, when it comes down to it, there's very few students of mine who actually have like great hand positioning. Some of them have a decent, but there's like quite a few of you guys that need to really sit down and focus on your hand positioning. When you have good hand positioning, it opens up doors for a lot of other things. It makes you faster. It allows you to play longer without pain. All these different things. Luckily for me and for you guys, I'm currently in a kinesiology class, and what we're learning in my college class is everything to do with nerves, bones, and muscles and how they work. And so I'm able to kind of pass some knowledge on to you guys. So we have nerves that pass through our hand. We also have ligaments and tendons that are in our hands, and they allow us to do everything that's in our hands. Most of the muscle mass that makes our hands move is actually down here in our forearm and kind of the inside of our forearm and the back side of our forearm. We have what are called our extensors. They're going to pull your fingers forward in the back of our arm, and we have our flexors, which are going to pull our hands forward in the back of our arm. A good mistake that a lot of people make is that you want to work on your flexion and making the flexion really strong as a musician. But what they don't realize is that actually pretty young, you have a lot of flexion power already, and you don't really necessarily need to build much more to be a faster player. And a lot of times you also need to be working on strengthening your extensors as a musician to improve your play, because your ability to lift your fingers away from the strings to then move on to your next note is what separates you from the next guy. Right? All of the movements that I'm doing, they're going to be making tendons move inside of my wrist structure, which also share space with those nerves. So now these tendons are moving, creating a lot of like friction and tension, and now they're pushing on these nerves, which then cause a lot of pain for me. We're looking to reduce the tension in our hand. We're looking to improve the form of our hand, to be faster, to be more efficient, all these different things. So now that we've had this long-winded discussion, let's look at what we need to be doing with our hand to help us play better and reduce injury. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be looking at, and one of the biggest things, is going to be this wrist. Okay, our wrist plays a huge factor in this, because most of the swelling and most of, as you can see, the thinnest point right here is my wrist, right? There's where most of the tension on my nerves are going to be, right? So any bend in my wrist is going to play a major factor in any injury that I have, or speed reduction in my ability to play is going to be due to my wrist. So this is the first place we want to look at to be adjusting our form to try to improve ourselves. The next location is then going to be kind of like finger control. If you notice, kind of like beginner players will have interesting like they're gonna pull their fingers in weird ways be, because they don't necessarily have all the finger control. So finger control and relaxation of these joints, right? Your proximal, middle, and distal joint, right, are very, very, very important. Relaxation and control of your form make a huge difference in your ability to play these parts, to play whatever it is that you're wanting to play, and also play it for a long period of time, right, without injury. Okay, so now let's look at some benchmarks that we can look at in our hand to try to reduce these things. So the first thing we're looking for is a gap in your hand, and it's going to sit right here between your like this pinching area right here and the fretboard. There should be a gap. And so if we take my instrument and we sit right here and I use proper form, you can see there is in fact a gap between that pinch and the fretboard. And this is very important for proper hand positioning because it allows us, number one, to have the proper distance for our fingers to be playing on the frets that we want to play at. But then it also puts our thumb in a good position. And you can notice it usually hangs out kind of like between this index finger and third finger. That's usually where my thumb is hanging out. And so when it's there, that is a very efficient location to play at. The reason why when you start an instrument, you don't necessarily want to try to play in this way is that there's a little bit of control lacking, relaxation lacking, and a little bit of strength that's lacking, right? Especially when it comes to our upper fingers. Our upper fingers don't necessarily want to push pressure because you can see my thumb is over here, right, between these two, but these two guys are placing pressure this way into the fretboard, very far away from my thumb, right? So that does take a little bit of wrist strength, right? It also takes a little bit of this muscle right here, thumb strength. Sorry, I don't remember the name of it, even though my teacher taught me. But we don't need to know the name of it, right? We just need to know what we need to be looking for. So there's a couple things we can do for this. The most recent discovery that I've been working on is placing an object in kind of that crook of our hand, and it has to sit between the fretboard and our hand. If we do this, we will force our hand to begin to develop the strength and control it needs playing in this position, right? So I can play just like a little major scale. And having an object between there will force us to keep that gap between the fretboard and our hand. So that's a great thing. The next thing I see is a lot of times people, as you can see right now, currently my fingers are pointed basically vertically. They're parallel with the fret. If you look at my finger right here, you'll notice that it is parallel to this fret and it's pointed straight up off of that fret. It's not pointed at my face. A lot of times you'll notice a lot of players playing with their fingers pointed at their face. You can see where my finger is now. The problem with this is we push a lot of power into our index finger and third finger, right? But we're taking away power from these other fingers. What happens is we reduce our ability to play scales or anything in a certain position. So instead of now playing a lick like this, now with this like this, it's better for us to play kind of like this. You can see the problem already occurring, right? I'm moving my hand, it's going to slow me down. On top of that, I'm not generating power in these other fingers, right? All kinds of issues are happening. On top of that, I have a lot of what we call ulnar deviation in my wrist. As soon as I point my hand towards this ulna bone, right? I'm ulnar deviating it. I'm going to be creating a lot of tension and friction in my wrist as it tries to make things move, right? So we want to reduce that, get things to point straight up, straight down, right? Parallel to your frets. So when you're playing, not only do you want to be generating that gap, but you also want to be very conscientious about your fingers pointing straight up and down with the frets. Now, more than any particular thing I can tell you is just encouraging you to work on this and to spend time on this. It's very easy for a player who is currently relatively efficient in their current way of playing, right? You could play like this all day long. You're pretty efficient at it. You kind of know what's happening, right? Your hand looks like this a lot, right? And so it's difficult to separate yourself from that and say, you know what, I need to break this down. I need to generate a new way of playing. And it's very difficult because you're used to the way of currently playing. Your fingers have developed a certain level of comfortability in the current shape that they're in, right? But the problem is that if you stick with that, it leads to injury. So we want to push through that. We want to push through it. So every day, spend 10 to 20 minutes. 20 minutes would be great. You can spend more than that, go ahead. But I'm not going to push you because people are busy, you know? But you want to be spending a decent amount of time just working on playing your instrument with this type of form. If you have trouble keeping your fingers from doing movements like this, then you need to be holding something like this. If you have trouble keeping your fingers from doing something like this, then you need to be really sitting down and forcing your fingers to sit parallel to the bars on your instrument, right? They should be sitting parallel to those frets. And you need to focus on it and spend some time doing it. You could play songs that you know already very well, or you could sit there and play scales. What matters is that you're sitting there playing and getting used to that new form. And what you'll find is after you start getting used to this form, it is way more efficient and it's more comfortable. And all of a sudden, you'll pass this certain threshold, and all of a sudden, your fingers will actually feel better in the new form than they will in your previous form. And that's where you'll jump the gap. And all of a sudden, you'll only want to play the way that I do. You know what I mean? And I'm not perfect all the time. I'm not going to say that. But most of the time, I find myself playing in this form. And it really does help me out. Helps me with my speed. It helps me play for as much as I do, because it's absurd number of hours at the moment. Probably need to cut back. So I'm hoping that you guys will see this and really start to think about your form, the way you play, because a lot of time in your lessons will be spent on learning a song, or learning what note gets played when, or learning what position you need to play a certain lick, or if you're getting further along, the theory behind the songs, or what scale this is, or different positionings for different scales or licks or whatever. But very little, very, very, very little time is spent actually thinking and critically analyzing your movements, right? To be a successful person in any activity that you do, you need to analyze yourself, right? It could be music, it could be running, it could be your school, it could be math, it could be English, it could be how you deal with your relationships in your life. It does not matter. You need to be analytical about it if you want to improve things, right? And if you look at a lot of people who are stagnant in their life, they choose to not analyze those things, right? I firmly believe that all of my students have the capacity to be analytical about their life and to work to improve things around them, right? So we can look, just in something as simple as our hand form to be analytical about. And, hopefully that'll translate to everything else in music. And if I'm doing a really good job, translate to everything else in your life, right? But just think about this, because this translates to injuries further on down the line. It translates to your ability to play better in the future, all kinds of things. So hopefully you guys take that to heart, and hopefully I haven't been too rambling, but it is something that's super important, and it doesn't get as much time spent on it as it should in lessons, right? So thanks for watching. I hope you guys learned something good. See you next time.